we're going to talk about security risks within the Oracle eBusiness Suite. And we're going to do it from an internal audit perspective. And really try to focus in on some areas that an internal auditor may not know about within the Oracle eBusiness Suite and some of those specific security risks that will impact the application that they're running. Again, my name is Steve Coase. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Integrigy. And I've been working with the Oracle eBusiness Suite for a long time. And for those of you not familiar with Integrigy, we really try to bridge the gap between databases, applications, and security. Our main goal is to provide that eBusiness Suite specific security knowledge. And it provides both security services for the eBusiness Suite, and we also have a tool that basically automates the security assessment and some of the internal audit functions that you probably do. So one of the questions we do get is, how much do you know about the eBusiness Suite, and how much do you know so much about the eBusiness Suite security? This is a list of the security alerts we've opened with Oracle over the past several years, and so these are actually our security bugs in the eBusiness Suite that have been fixed and then released as part of the critical patch updates that come out every quarter. We do actually a lot of research and development internally, trying to find security weaknesses within the application, need to be changed, things like that. So this agenda, we're going to start with compliance issues, talk about compliance at a high level with the eBusiness Suite, talk about security best practices with the eBusiness Suite, then talk about how to protect some of the sensitive data, so you may be storing credit card numbers, security numbers, that type of information. It's a little bit about privilege and access to the application, especially at the database level. And then finally finish up talking about secure remote access is one area that we've seen a lot of problems with a number of customers. As you open up the eBusiness Suite to the internet, maybe using iStore, iSupplier, that there is a specific security configuration that needs to be done, and it is often overlooked by both internal audit and the security team in our organization. So let's start talking about some of the compliance issues in the Oracle eBusiness Suite and some of the challenges that many organizations face. So the main compliance drivers for the eBusiness Suite is first Sarbanes-Oxley. So most artificial systems, this is a major component. So really looking at, from a security perspective, a lot of this database structure changes, configuration changes, how are users accessing the application, those type of things. Second area that for compliance a lot of organizations are now starting to be impacted by is if you're storing any types of credit card numbers in the eBusiness Suite, you have to actually be compliant with PCI-DSS, which is part of the payment card industry's security standard, which is done by Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express, and is a very stringent set of security requirements that require to lock down the application. And with the eBusiness Suite, this is actually somewhat problematic because a lot of these security recommendations are difficult to implement. A little bit more. Now we're actually having individual privacy laws. So if you do store data such as social security number and bank account numbers and person's name, there's very specific regulations on how you have to protect that information and what happens if that information is breached. Finally, most organizations have internal standards. Those will be mapped to COBIT or COSO in terms of their SOX controls and their general IT security controls. So these are the main drivers that we see most of the Oracle eBusiness Suite clients looking at and trying to security internally. So I'll delve down into one specific area here, and specifically PCI-DSS. So PCI, as I said, is 12 different requirements, and they're very stringent. And specific also, most security standards out there are some fluffy, high level, well, you need to protect data and things like that. When you work with PCI-DSS, it's actually extremely specific. So if you're talking about under section number 8, you need to use assigned for access and how access controls are done. PCI-DSS is one of the few security standards that actually forces a specific minimum password length of 7. Most security standards say, well, you need a password, it needs to be protected, it needs to be of sufficient length. But PCI-DSS is very stringent about specifying to a granular level of detail what needs to be done. In terms of PCI compliance in Oracle eBusiness Suite, this here shows from an actual customer some of the findings that we did on a full PCI-DSS assessment of the Oracle eBusiness Suite R12 environment. The boxes show basically where we find high level vulnerabilities or findings, and medium and low. As you see, not all the requirements map to, in the Oracle EBS Suite environment, only specific ones are required. But you can see the numbers in the boxes show you how many sub-requirements are actually required for an Oracle EBS Suite environment. So in terms of PCI compliance, most customers with a few specific requirements. So as part of PCI, 6.1 requires security patches to be applied in a certain time frame. With PCI-DSS, the time frame is 1 month of release. So this is a very stringent type of requirement. So when a critical patch update comes out from Oracle, released every quarter, DSS requires you to actually apply that security patch within 30 days of release, which is very unusual for any customer to actually do that. Typically, it's 6 to 12 months that a lot of customers that we work with are applying the patches. And PCI-DSS is like this, that each specific requirement is very granular, 1 month of release, 7 for password lengths and things like that. So it's fairly difficult to comply with PCI for an Oracle Business Suite environment as compared to like just a Windows environment or something, or a simple payment application. That's kind of a brief overview of some of the compliance issues and drivers to many Oracle Business Suite customers. Let's talk a little bit about security best practices. So from an internal audit perspective, compliance is fairly to the application, segregation of duties, within the application. Internal audit typically doesn't start delving into how is IT general security controls done, how is the security of the application protected, and it's usually a very straightforward problem as people look at it. Well, we've got a database and we've got an application accessing that database. But in a security perspective, the database connectivity problem is actually a pretty complex problem. So this is one of the challenges that a lot of people face, that you're not having just an application access your database. You have many different people. You've ad hoc users maybe doing ad hoc queries. You've got reporting tools. You've got batch processing. Tons of things coming in on the back end in terms of interfaces and feeds. The DBAs are accessing your database using generic privileged accounts. A lot of times auditing is not turned on, so you have no idea who's accessing the database when and where and why. You've got backup tools, management tools. So in terms of security and controls and compliance, you have to be taking all these into account and understanding how your database is being accessed and who's accessing it and when. You may have very stringent can place at the application level. Well, any direct access to the database in the back end is circumventing all your application controls. Go to the database directly as a DBA, I can now just manipulate any GL entry I want. I can add in invoices, add in new vendors, things like that, circumventing any application controls, eventually circumventing any reporting controls too. The issue on the security area is security is decaying over time. A lot of times what we see is clients are actually implementing the application. They actually do a fairly good job around go live. That's their peak of security. They're doing very well. Things are locked down. They've done a good job. But as time goes on, the application is actually decaying in terms of security. So we're actually losing security. Patches need to be applied. Exploits are published. You're doing upgrades. One big area that we see is a lot of temporary tables created by DBAs containing sensitive data. That becomes a significant issue and challenge. Another area we see a challenge for many customers is organizational misalignment. Within the Business Suite, there's a number of groups that are really concerned about security. From the internal auditors, you've got an IT security group. They're good at understanding network and operating system security, but typically they have very little or limited understanding of database security in the Oracle Business Suite. A very different architecture. You have to have been through the Oracle Business Suite to understand how it's secured. There'd be a risk management group who's really understanding risk throughout the organization, but don't get down to the level of detail per location. There's not a data classification standard specifically for Oracle Business Suite. It may be at a very high level. And also the database administrators, they're just trying to keep the application up and running. last thing they ever want to do is impact the application's uptime. Security is always a layer that has some sort of impact. It's either a performance impact, an operational impact, but it does have some sort of impact. They're just trying to do a job and keep things up and running as much as possible. So now let's talk about a few specific areas in terms of security. So what I'll try to delve into now is a couple areas that you may not be aware with the Oracle eBusiness Suite, being an internal auditor, that you really have to be looking at, have to be concentrating on, and are typically found. So first, this is some data that we've compiled from our Oracle security assessments done at a number of clients. So this is a sampling of 120 production databases. And what we're showing here is how often we're finding default passwords. So the column to the right is showing the percentage of assessments per database we find default password. Oracle database, there's two accounts, sys and system. Those are basically the root account. Those own the database. Very seldom do we ever find a default password. What happens is we're actually finding a password 52% of the time in an account called DBMS NMP. This account has some privileges that can actually access and they'll allow me to actually get into the database. It's meant for a management account. Very few people change the passwords. As you can see, some of these other accounts, fairly high percentage. We should be seeing maybe 5% of the time, but instead we're seeing 30 to 40% of the time for a lot of these accounts. And these accounts are installed in very many Oracle databases throughout the world. And so anytime someone is going to try to hack in or attack a database, they're going to try these accounts first. And the opportunity to succeed is very high. So I'll actually give you a quick brief demonstration here real quick, and I'll show you how easy it is to actually attack database passwords. So this is a tool from Integrigy that we use it as an internal tool that actually cracks passwords. And we'll soon be releasing an add-on to the Oracle SQL Developer product. So if you're actually an internal auditor that you're trying to do queries in the database, Oracle does have a free tool called Oracle SQL Developer, and we'll be releasing an extension fairly shortly that actually allows you to do the same thing I'm going to demonstrate here for Oracle database passwords. So it's actually real client data. We've actually removed some of the information that you can track it back to a client. You click the Check Passwords button. So what's happening is it's going through and checking passwords, and it's using a method called brute forcing. What I'm going to do is actually test, in this case, 183,000 different passwords against each of these. And we'll just kind of let it go through here for a second. There's a number of tools available on the internet that you can do this. As long as you have some sort of access to the database and can pull back this information, anyone can do this. You can see this customer has done actually a fairly good job. We aren't finding any passwords. And now all of a sudden, this quickly is actually identify default passwords. So what we're seeing here, the account called AppsView. So this is an account that they use for read-only access that no one's ever changed the password, called AppsView. We've got several accounts here. The financial administrator account has a default password. So that means that a database account has full access to all of GL data, can basically do anything they want. So this is just an example on how quickly it is to check for default passwords. And what happened at the customer is, if we go to the top, you know a lot of the passwords up here were all changed. So when they went live, someone did a good job about changing all the passwords. What happened over time was that she did a lot of new installs and upgrades to the application, and no one changed the default passwords after those upgrades. Ended up with a lot of default passwords. Anyone can get into their database in this situation. And this is easy and quick it is to actually check these passwords. I have full database access. I can now control your database, and I can actually go in, insert GL, circumvent all your application controls, etc. It's a brief example of how easy it is and the problems that we see with default passwords in Oracle databases, and how easy it is to circumvent a lot of application controls very readily. Another significant area of problems is security bugs and vulnerabilities. So on a quarterly basis, Oracle releases a set of security patches that basically fix security bugs within the application. Oracle Critical Patch Updates. Part of, again, our sampling of our customer data that we've done assessments at, and how many months behind Remember, these are released every quarter, so this is when the customer actually applied the patch based on its release date. And as you can see, very few customers apply the patches within 3 to 6 months. Typically 9 months is when they first start applying it. A lot of times it's 24 months that they've been applied. And there's a significant number of security vulnerabilities in these patches. So again, I can basically, if I can access the database, I can circumvent your application controls even with a lowly privileged account. So actually, I'll give you a brief demonstration right now on how easy this is to do. A lot of people say, well, these are security vulnerabilities, they're hard to do. And so just a brief demonstration. So I'll actually just go to Google, type in Oracle exploits, and what people don't understand is there's actually websites out there. So Oracle releases a security patch. And so a nice man out of Germany, Alex Kornbruss, who runs a company called Red Database Security, and he actually publishes out on his website a collection of all these security vulnerabilities. So we'll just go into Oracle 10G, and they're very well documented. They're very clearly listed about what they do, where they are, what patches they were fixed in. If you haven't applied the latest security patches, you can basically just do a quick search on the internet and actually bring up different code. This is just an example. Be done by everybody in your organization, but anybody with rudimentary knowledge of SQL, especially any of your developers, can easily use exploit, basically take over your production database. Quickly go back to Google, and we'll just do another search here. We'll type in Oracle 11G exploit. And so I'll actually show you a quick demonstration. By just pulling information off the internet, I'll actually take over an Oracle database here real quick, just to give you an example of how easy some of these are. About 1 a quarter security bug that's fixed every quarter is actually released in form. You can just basically do a Google search, pull up some information, take over a database. And so this information was published out. And I'll now switch over to an Oracle database environment here. And so now I'm actually here and logged into an Oracle database. This is an Oracle 11G database running Oracle eBusiness Suite. And so I've got an account here. And we'll show you that it's got no privileges. Basically, there's no roles assigned to it. There's no system privileges. The only system privilege I have is I can connect to the database. And so then it has no tables. So this is the lowest privileged account I can possibly have. So the user really can't do anything. I might have just let them run table. But basically go out to Google, pull up information. So basically now I've copied this from that blog post. Just execute that code real quick. This is basically doing is someone at Oracle made a mistake. So there was this package called BMS X permissions. So someone at Oracle, when they were actually coding this up, said, well, this has to be used when I import and export the database, which is a pure DBA function, and only DBA should be allowed to do it. And for some reason they said, well, any user can actually execute this. So it was granted to public when it shouldn't have been. And so what this allows me to do is basically grant out Java permissions. And so with just a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of Googling, I was able to bring up this code that then basically is now giving me full permissions to read or write any file on the operating system. And all I've done was copied this from the blog post. And so this is how easy it is to do. Now, this is just an example, but now I just now run a second piece of code, and I basically now write any file at the operating system level. And we call this an imagination attack, because it's really up to the user's or the hacker's imagination or the attacker to do what they want to do. That's how easy it is to exploit a security vulnerability that's been patched by Oracle. So if you want to apply security patches immediately or in a fairly short time frame, it's easy to do. One of the major areas that we see, so base passwords and critical patch updates, a lot of people really ignore those when you're looking at from an internal audit perspective. But if I can exploit those, I am now able to circumvent your application controls. So really the key security risks for an Oracle eBusiness Suite environment are first, exploitation of Oracle security vulnerabilities. So even though I may have a very lowly privileged account, I can still access the database and actually take over the database fairly readily. The second is brute forcing of Oracle passwords. So it's really easy to do to look at database passwords. And one of the keys is, well, when you're cloning your databases, so in a typical Oracle eBusiness Suite environment, I can basically go in to one of your test or development environments, because when these environments are cloned, they the entire database, and very seldom do people change the passwords in their test and development environments. So your developers can go into the test or development database that they have full access to read out of the data, brute the passwords, get a production level password, now back into production with a password that hasn't been changed, and actually manipulate data, steal data, things like that in your production environment. The final major risk we see with an Oracle eBusiness Suite environment is the encryption of Oracle eBusiness Suite passwords. So there is a fundamental flaw within the Oracle eBusiness Suite that allows the application user passwords to be decrypted. So again, it's a very similar scenario with the database account passwords, that I can go in to the development environment and actually decrypt your production level application passwords. So potentially I can go in and get maybe your AP manager's password into production, and I can go in as that user in your production environment as a developer, because I was able to go into my development environment, decrypt because it wasn't changed when you copied production down to development, and then go in as your AP manager account in production, circumventing all your application controls. There's some fixes to this problem, and we actually have a white paper published on our website that gives you very detailed recommendations on how to solve it. In terms of Oracle eBusiness Suite security recommendations, the first step is to really adhere to the best practices published by Oracle. They're really dated, and they haven't been updated recently. We actually wrote those security recommendations for Oracle. So we think they're fairly good for their age, but there are a number of things that you need to do beyond that. And the other area is to actually perform periodic security reviews and assessments on your environment. Again, as the environment's changing, you're applying patches and things like that, unless you're continually validating the compliance, there will be things that creep up. So again, when you're installing upgrades and things like that, new database accounts are added with default passwords. About 98% of the environments that we survey assessments, we find default passwords, at least one or more. In a very good environment, we actually usually find one or two. The problem is that a new database account may have been created from an upgrade. You may have created a new database account for a user that was given a password like that. So that's kind of a brief overview of kind of the compliance issues and the security best practices. Now let's talk about protecting sensitive data. This is a major area that is becoming much more prevalent. More customers are having credit card numbers, security numbers, and things like that, and the data legislation protection is actually increased. But one of the major problems is, and we see many customers, is the apps read account. So if you need ad hoc users to go in and basically query some data, the easiest way is actually to create an apps read account. And this basically is just a read-only account that has access to all the data. The problem is that it's very uncontrolled. You don't use sharing the password, because Tom might give it to John and say, hey, I need access. Can you give it? He said, well, they just kind of send it out an email, so I guess I can. There's no individual accountability. Unless you've got auditing turned on, you really have no idea who's actually accessing that account. Another thing that makes it more complicated is that the granularity of privilege assignments within Oracle is fairly rudimentary. So it's actually difficult for a DBA just to say, okay, here's a bunch of tables that I need to grant access out to. Those privileges become difficult to assign because you can't do it schema by schema. You have to do it everything or do it one by one. And so whenever there's any changes to the application, new tables are added, they have to go back and change those privileges. Major issue for a lot of customers is that you've got typically 5 to 10 different test and development databases per production environment. In your production environment, you might have social security numbers, and what happens is that production environment is copied down on a periodic basis to the test and development instances. You may have UAT, training, development, EBA instance, a patch instance, a lot of different instances that support one production environment. And every time you copy that production environment down to test and development, you're actually copying all the data. So unless you're scrambling that data every single time you clone, that you're actually seeing it over and over and over in all these environments. And typically what happens is the is not locked down as much as in a production environment. So you may actually open it up to a lot of different developers. You may have offshore developers, things like that. A third issue with the Oracle Business Suite is the encryption is actually fairly difficult to implement in the EBS environment. Oracle really only supports Oracle Transparent Data Encryption as the encryption standard. It's a very limited solution. It doesn't provide data level encryption. It only does it at the file level system. There's many products out there that do data encryption, but Oracle doesn't support any of those products, and if you implement them, you may get performance issues and things like that. The keys on doing encryption is actually doing it for the backup media. That's typically where data is lost, is you lose the backup tape or something like that. The encryption native to the Oracle eBusiness Suite is for credit card numbers at this point. Oracle's promised to do it for Social Security numbers and other data, but it hasn't come out yet. An area that we see with sensitive data is that a lot of environments have a lot of sensitive data and they keep it forever. So in the HR system we recently did was they had 15 years of social numbers for every single employee they ever actually hired over the past 15 years. Sometimes it's a data in, never data out. Seldom purged from Oracle eBusiness Suite environments, especially things like data, credit card data, and things like that. If you're concerned about PCI compliance, a major issue is that PCI recommends having minimal retention of any sensitive data, including credit card numbers. They recommend 1 to 2 years. We see a lot of environments that have never purged credit card numbers out of their environment. May have 5 to 7 years of credit card data there. So the keys for protecting sensitive data within your Oracle eBusiness Suite environment is first to always scramble data. There are a number of third-party products, but there's also very simple scripts that you can do. The key problem with scrambling sensitive data is actually finding it. When we go in and do a review of an eBusiness Suite environment to scramble sensitive data, and a lot of customers are doing it a fairly decent job. Ones though is a lot of times the sensitive data is scattered everywhere. It's easy to know the 2 or 3 tables, like for Social Security numbers, everyone knows the PER, all people F table, is basically the master HR table that contains all your employees and contains Social Security numbers. So it's often scrambled. What happens is the DBA had to do a change directly to that table one day. So as a good DBA, the first thing they did was they made a backup of that table. Just in case anything went wrong, they could put it back. Well, that backup table now has Social Security numbers, and it might not be scrambled next time you do a clone. You're also having customizations and interfaces. A lot of times we'll see Social Security numbers coming in interfaces. Those interfaces then are copied to another table and processed, and that table that may not ever be deleted. So that, again, you've got now another table of Social Security numbers. A recent review we did of an HR system was, well, they were scrambling 3 different tables. We did our assessment. We've got some tools that can actually search for things like Social Security numbers. We actually found they had 53 different tables with Social Security numbers in them. So very different than what they actually thought they had, because it's in a lot of different interface tables, some customizations, things like that all require Social Security numbers. So you have to do a very careful review when you're looking at, well, they say they're scrambling. Are they scrambling it at every single point? This year issue is actually access to sensitive data. The biggest problem with Oracle eBusiness Suite is generic privileged accounts. There's lots of them. They're often used. When DBAs are actually patching a database, they use the apps account. Well, it's a very privileged account. It has access to all your sensitive data. And it's very difficult to figure out who's using that account, when, and why. And unless you're putting very good auditing on and process controls around use of that account, it's very difficult to track back to individual. You may have limited it to the DA group, but you have 6 or 7 DBAs who have access to it. So a specific topic with Oracle eBusiness Suite on sensitive data is Oracle credit card data. So Oracle actually does have a credit card encryption solution. A lot of people we see actually haven't implemented this. It is somewhat of a major change to the application because what happened prior to this patch, the credit card data was scattered throughout every module. So if a module such as order management, accounts receivable, things like that required a credit card number, they actually stored it in the table of that module. So there's like 6 or 7 different places where credit card data was stored. Well, the patch moves all those credit card numbers into a single table in IBY, which is iPayments module. So here's a diagram of that of it to show actually what happened. So as we can see, the blue box is there where credit card data was stored, and the tables are in pink. Change is actually putting all that data into the green tables there. So you got 2 single tables that actually store credit card numbers. This is a fairly big change. It's something if you are any credit card numbers through your eBusiness Suite environment and are concerned with PCI compliance, this is a critical patch to employ. So, stated at a high level, this topic, and we've kind of touched on it briefly already, so I'm going to make it very brief here, is talking about privilege and access. And the biggest problem with Oracle eBusiness Suite from an internal audit and controls perspective is generic and privileged accounts. It's difficult to get back to who's accessing the application and the database to the individual user. So at the database level, you've got the apps account, system, Apple Sys are all privileged accounts. They have access to all data. They can basically do anything they want. They can insert any transaction, modify any transaction, read all data. At the application level, you've got an account sysadmin, and you have several other accounts. One recommendations from a lot of auditors are, well, you have to disable the sysadmin account. Unfortunately, due to coding on Oracle's part, the sysadmin account actually needs to be used for some maintenance activities. It needs to be used very seldom, but there are a few things that the application administrators always have to use sysadmin for. So unfortunately, the sysadmin account can't be disabled, but you can actually minimize the use of it and make sure you've got some audit processes in place and controls around the actual use of the sysadmin account, and there's individual named accounts for all other uses. Again, database access is the problem. Anytime you've got these generic accounts, basically people can do ad hoc database access. As I just showed you an example of a security vulnerability, they can take over the database. And the apps read account, there's very little control about what people can access and what they can do with them. One of the major problems with these generic accounts is really, unless you're turning on a lot of auditing and a lot of time and effort to control and audit those accounts, it's very difficult to do. I had a very depth discussion with a customer recently that they did put in a fair amount of auditing. They did what is a very good job about actually having the controls in place, going through and actually pulling up the SQL statements used by the DBAs. Above and beyond that I've ever seen any other customer. They were doing a great job. They were doing those. They were doing reports. They had an audit trail of every single time a DBA accessed the database using an apps account, and they were able to sort out when the DBAs were doing it versus the application, and very detailed reports. And what would happen then, there was in the internal audit department that would get those reports and actually then had to look through them to approve what the DBAs were doing and make sure that there was nothing wrong, like they're actually updating journal entries or adding new vendors behind the scenes using just SQL. Well, when we interviewed that person in the internal audit department who had to review those reports, she basically fundamentally said, I don't really look at those reports anymore because I have no idea what the DBAs are doing. I looked at them for 1 month and I have no idea what they meant. And that's one of the major problems is even if you do have a fairly sophisticated level of auditing and control, you need someone who can understand what's happening in those transactions, what those SQL statements mean, why they're accessing a specific point. And unfortunately, unless you're a DBA or have very good Oracle eBusiness Suite knowledge, that's a very difficult proposition. When you're looking through and trying to control access at different levels, you really have to understand and through every single part of the process to say, okay, is someone who's going to have to audit this understand why this is happening? So the customer I was just talking about actually went back to a process where if they Probably not the best process, but it was working for them at the end of the day. Was all they had to do was require a change control ticket for each access. So no one was actually auditing the SQL statements, but they actually required a change control ticket for every single time that DBAs accessed the environment and had to execute any SQL that made a change, which was actually a fairly good control. No one reviewed the actual SQL statements, but at least there was some level of control there for access and what was being done. And then they had the forensic level audit. They had to go back. They actually knew what happened. In their cases, and the DBAs did a fairly good job about always update change control ticket. But if it wasn't a change control ticket, then someone would review the SQL, at least limited it down to just one or twice a month that they actually had to look at what was happening. So that's privilege and access at a high level. The final topic we're going to talk about is secure remote access. This is one area that's often overlooked and requires a very specific configuration from the Oracle eBusiness Suite's perspective. So when I talk about external access to eBusiness Suite, this is basically if you're running iSupplier, iStore, iSupport, iRecruitment. There's about 10 different modules that are certified for external access. And the reason that external access is such a significant security risk is you have a risk and you have an external risk. Most Oracle eBusiness Suite environments are running internally on your network. They're your financial systems, your HR systems, and they don't have any external access. So basically, unless someone can break into your network, it's very difficult to access. Well, as soon as you provide external access to your eBusiness Suite, you're basically now opening up your entire environment to the internet. One fundamental flaws within the Oracle eBusiness Suite is that it's so complex and so big and so tightly integrated. Even you might be just running General Ledger. Let's say, as an example, you're running the General Ledger module. You're running one module out of 250. Well, Oracle eBusiness Suite is installed every single time, and it can't change this. You all 250 modules. So if you're a client running one module, General Ledger, we're really just running General Ledger. You've got a full financial suite installed. You've got a full manufacturing suite, CRM, HR, or student system. The list goes on and on. There's over 250 modules in the application, and all those are installed. What that means is that there's 4,000 web pages available. Even though you're not using any of that, all those web pages are there. All those forms, all those reports, all those database accounts. All that information is available in the Oracle eBusiness Suite because it's so tightly integrated. The only way they can make it work is basically by giving you the whole thing. Even if you might be just running General Ledger, remember, you're always running every single module. There's no way to change that. And the problem comes in is that there's a security vulnerability, a weakness, a risk in any one module. Even though you're not running that module, you haven't licensed it, configured or used it, you're running all those modules. Well, when you deploy to the internet, you might be deploying just, let's say, iSupplier, which is actually a fairly common module for many customers now, especially if you're just running financials. Well, deploying iSupplier to the internet, you're deploying the entire Oracle eBusiness Suite. So that means you've got all 40,000 web pages available on the internet. And so any flaws in any single module, even though you're not running, say, some of the CRM modules, there might be a flaw that comes out in a CRM module, you're still potentially vulnerable to it unless you do a very specific configuration. So the key is for Oracle eBusiness Suite, there's a messaging note that details out a 15 pages and about 10 different steps on how to very specifically configure the Oracle eBusiness Suite for an external environment. Unless you do that properly, it's very many risks are involved in the application because you've got web pages from every different module. They may not be configured, but if there's a security vulnerability in any of them, you can do it. And then the second part is once I can get into or weakness in your Oracle eBusiness Suite externally, it's just iSupplier, I have access to all data. Because the way the application works is there's one database account. So the external iSupplier is using the apps account. So any vulnerability I can find in iSupplier, and if you're running a fully integrated environment, you might be running both financials and HR. Through iSupplier, even though it's just one financial module, I can access all your HR data in vulnerability. So you've opened up the entire eBusiness Suite environment on the internet, and a very specific configuration that you have to follow to basically hopefully protect the environment. So things that you're doing is, one, limiting access to just that one module, because by default 250 modules are available. And second is, when you're on the internet, you potentially can log in as any different user. So if I don't down the responsibilities that are accessible externally, users can go home and now access the Oracle eBusiness Suite just externally over the internet. They go into AP and things like that. So there's two specific items that are done during the configuration externally. One is locking down the modules, and two, locking down what responsibilities that they can use. Because it's much preferable to have your users going in through a VPN or a known access method versus just using their home computer to access it over the internet. So a couple different areas. The purpose of this session was really to give you an overview of some of the security risks that you may not be aware of, especially for internal auditors who are very used to working with the application level goals, creation of duties, those type of areas, and that aren't as used to or haven't audited in detail the database, the application server, those type of areas that have a number of security risks that can basically circumvent any application controls. So one of the areas is that when you're looking at doing security and compliance for the eBusiness Suite as a whole, it's really a team effort. DBAs, IT security, and internal audit all have to work together to make sure that all aspects are done. And there's that organizational misalignment that basically Oracle eBusiness Suite security falls on a number of different groups, and each have to do their part. And a lot of times, well, the IT security people say, well, we don't know anything about that, and that's the DAs need to secure it. Internal audit is typically focused just in on the application layer, and they forget about the database. So if you come together as an organization and kind of really look at it as holistically top to bottom, there can be a lot of security risks that can easily circumvent or designed application security controls. Second is, security is really constantly changing. There's always new risks. There's always application changes going on. One of the biggest things we see with the database passwords, whenever you do an upgrade or install a major patch that may install a new module, you're getting a new default password. And it picks up on that. They have full access to your database and can access any data, enter transactions, things like that. Thirdly, Oracle's coming out with new security vulnerabilities. They're patching them, and there's always 2 or 3 every single quarter. That's significant risk. Also, if you're on a DMZ environment, so again, you're running externally with iSupplier, iStore, or a module like that, there's often one security vulnerability released per quarter that actually impact external environments. So, and as an example, there's something called SQL injection. So that would allow me to execute a SQL statement by just using a web browser at home for your iSupplier environment, and I can actually execute a SQL statement in your database. So some of those security vulnerabilities are very powerful, and a lot of companies don't prioritize applying the security patches in a timely manner. Finally, a lot of customers always ask us, okay, where's the silver bullet? What can I do very quickly? What can I do to get my environment secure? And fortunately, the eBusiness Suite is a very complex environment because you've got a very complex technology stack. You've got a lot of different modules and applications running, so you might be running financials and HR or manufacturing, CRM. And so all these things must come together, and unless you've got a very detailed set of policies and procedures, you're performing security reviews. We often see 2 or 3 different tools are required to actually help secure the environment. So if you're very concerned about encryption, you may need an encryption tool. If you want detailed advanced auditing, you might need an auditing tool. You need a security scanner to actually scan it because you don't have time to do the detailed reviews yourself. So a very complex environment. A lot of people underestimate. And if you think about it, you spent $20 to $30 million for a large implementation of eBusiness Suite is not unheard of. How much time and effort have you put into security related to that? This is your key application. Imagine if someone steals your employees' social security numbers. What will it be the impact to the organization? What if someone just goes in and basically wipes out the environment? If you're down without your Oracle eBusiness Suite for 2 or 3 days because someone went into the database and just deleted data wholeheartedly, what your all general ledger entries? How long does it take to recover from a backup. It'll be a 24-hour outage to maybe 48 hours. Those are all really realistic scenarios in an e-business suite environment. Here's some key references. A lot of times from internal auditors we ask, where should I start? What's the best place to get information regarding the e-biz suite security? Because it's often a foreign concept. On our website, Integrigy.com, we actually release a lot of security white papers. We have a blog, the Oracle Security blog, and we release kind of timely information. As an example of a white paper, we did release years ago a very detailed PCI white paper. So if you're concerned about PCI compliance, we actually take all the PCI requirements and map them to the Oracle e-business suite. From a checklist perspective, the Oracle best practices for securing the e-business suite, I include the MetaLink notes here. You want to talk to your DBA if you don't have direct MetaLink access, just provide them those node IDs and they can pull them off MetaLink for you and give them to you. Specific internal auditor resources, Jeff Hare with ERP Risk Advisors is a very excellent resource. And he basically has two different groups, one internal controls and security list server. So that's basically a Yahoo group that you can go on and post questions regarding the Oracle e-business suite to a large group of auditors. And they provide a very open dialogue so you can go through and discuss different topics. A big issue recently was how to detect default passwords in the Oracle e-business suite and things like that. He also has for end or customers an internal controls repository. So what he's done is actually also gathered a large number of controls spreadsheets and matrices and compiled that information that's available in the public domain, which is also helpful for a lot of people. And then Jeff has also released a book on the Oracle e-business suite controls, application security best practices. That's a very good book. It's available on Amazon and other places. And finally, ISACA also has a book. I've been a reviewer on it. It's actually a very good high-level overview reference of Oracle e-business suite and some controls, and it does go module by module. So it does talk about GL, AP, AR, and the different controls within each of those modules and what you should do. So that's Oracle Business Suite security risks at a high level. In the future, we are going to be taking some of these topics and delving down. So in January, we already have an R12 upgrade webinar scheduled. So we're going to talk about your R12 upgrade if you are moving that direction and some of the things you need to do to secure the upgrade and some of the things that are useful to do as you're going through the upgrade process that you may not have done in your 11i environment. And we're also going to be having some protecting sensitive data sessions and how to solve the generic and privileged account access. So it's at a high level. Just here's contact information. Integrigy is very open about answering questions at any time, so feel free to email me if you have any questions. One of the things that we like to do is receive questions so that we can actually do blog posts and also kind of direct our information to where customers are really struggling and need more information. Turn it back to Phil, and we'll kind of open it up for some questions as we've got a few more minutes.
All right. Thanks, Dave. We have a few questions here. The first is, how often do you think CPU patches should be applied?
This is kind of an open area that, based on what your specific requirements are, will change. We recommend most customers at least do it every month at a time, and we call it the N-1 patching strategy, and we've got some fairly large customers who have adopted this, that basically by the time the next CPU is coming out, they're trying to get the previous CPU installed by then. A lot of that strategy works by the first month, you kind of let the CPU patches sit, allows Oracle to refresh them. Then in the second month, you basically applied it to test and development environments, and then by the third month, you've actually got it moved into production. We release a detailed guidance on the CPUs on our website, so October 2010 is up there, and we actually provide some use strategies. So we'll take each CPU and kind of delve into it and detail out all the security bugs and kind of what the risks are and what you need to test for each one. And then we'll kind of do a quick strategy. And one of our strategies is, well, the data security patches are very stable, very easy to apply. They're cumulative. So we actually recommend all customers apply the database security patches first and then look at application patches later. the database security patches have very little impact, very few problems, are easy to apply, but provide you the most benefit.
All right, question. Thank you. Another question. Observation that DBAs and those which have logical access to the DBA server can also turn off auditing. So how do you control that? How do you control the DBAs?
Yep. So one of the major issues with Oracle auditing is it's not very good. So the audit trail data can actually be manipulated. So there's two different levels of auditing in Oracle E-Business Suite environment. First, there's the trails within the Oracle E-Business Suite itself, and that's actually stored within database tables. Then the second level of auditing is at the database level. So at the database level, you can turn on auditing and either store it in one of three places, the database, operating system, or what we recommend most customers do is the syslog. So you can actually enable it so the Oracle database sends the entries directly out through syslog, which then can go to an external server. Even those strategies have a problem because if you're auditing within the application, it's still stored in the database, and then at the base level, it's either stored in the database or the operating system. Well, first, the DBA can manipulate both those places, and secondly, the DBA, as soon as they bound the database, they can basically shut down the database, turn off auditing, and restart the database. There's really nothing you can do about that. The only solution, if you're concerned about that specific problem, is there are a number of third-party products. Two that we work with most are Guardium and Imperva, and we help a lot of customers actually implement those and come up with required definitions. And Guardium and Imperva, and there's a number, Oracle just has a new product called the Oracle Firewall also that they bought from Secerno. Those products are actually external to the database and can provide you that level of auditing if you need a very valid protected audit trail, because the way they work is either by looking at the network traffic, or they have agents on the server that, unless the DBA has root access, can't get access to. So it's a segregation of duties at the operating system level, which there should be, because the root access and the Oracle DBA should not have the same level of access. You can capture a full audit trail. Unfortunately, those products are fairly expensive. They're about $250,000 to start. They'll get it a little cheaper, but by the time you end up with consulting and hardware and everything else, that's probably the minimum going in price. But they do provide a very valid, detailed audit trail. So I think that answers the question.
Yes, I think so. The last one here. What do you view as the greatest risk to the Oracle E-Business Suite? And that's a pretty broad question.
So the risk that we see, and if you have to do anything to protect your E-Business Suite environment, the risk is if anyone can access the application at the database level, they can do anything they want. That's either via just accessing data, security vulnerabilities. So the best thing you can do to protect your E-Business Suite environment is to actually block access at the database level. Recommendation, just purely from an IT security general controls, because if you can't access it, you really can't do anything to exploit the data, exploit security vulnerabilities, etc. So that kind of be the one thing. If you had to do it, the recommendation is threats. Direct access is the biggest threat, and that is basically you can block access by putting a firewall in front of your data center, blocking access to a limited set of IPs at the database level, those type of things.